You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
More than a year ago, almost every industry in our state and across the country took a massive hit as the coronavirus closures started to set in. Perhaps one of the last industries waiting to come back online to its full capacity might be hotels, convention centers across Illinois. Joining us now is the head of the Illinois Hotel and Lodging Association, Michael Jacobson from Elgin. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
I know that you guys have been very involved in trying to offer the state advice or guidance on how to reopen safely. What are the biggest obstacles you're facing right now in getting there?
We were encouraged by the governor's announcement around the bridge phase, and obviously with hospitalization rates increasing across the state, that advancement into the bridge phase has hit the pause button a little bit. We're hopeful that these numbers will start to stabilize and we'll enter that bridge phase here in a short time, because that's really what the game changer is in terms of meetings and events for our hotels. Some meetings in these extremely large ballrooms or convention centers will begin to be able to hold up to 1,000 people under that bridge phase. And when you look at the total amount of revenue, what that means for our hotels, up to half of every hotel's revenue depends on group travel, which is meetings, events, weddings, social gatherings.
Yeah, and those were the things that everybody put on pause for so long. I don't know if how many people understand just the staggering amount of revenue and commerce that happens in this lane. Do you have a ballpark figure, or how would you describe or put into context the economic hit that hotels took this last year?
It's just been devastating when you look at how many hotels are still suspended across the state. Obviously, it's much more impactful in the city of Chicago, where there's even more than anywhere else in the state on conventions, where we have about 24 hotels that are still suspended right now. But you look at across the state, and we took a $3.5 billion hit in 2020 compared to revenue in 2019. It's about an 80% drop. And it's not even just the revenue, it's the tax revenue that we generate for the state as well. We've said for years that without all the different tax revenue that hotels generate, whether it's the hotel tax, sales tax, all the different taxes we generate, that each Illinois household would have to pay $1,600 more in taxes each year to make up for those losses. And unfortunately, we never thought we'd live to the day to actually see that scenario play out, but here we are.
I don't know many businesses that could withstand losing 80% of their revenue. I imagine have there been closures?
There have. So most of them were temporary closures. We have seen some foreclosures, some high visibility ones, particularly in the Chicagoland area. What people don't realize is that these hotels aren't owned by the major brands like Marriott or Hilton or Hyatt. These are all locally owned and individually owned and operated, and they're just operating under a franchise agreement with those brands. So these are your neighbors and people right down the street that own and invest in these hotels. And unfortunately, over the past year, a lot of them have lost their properties to foreclosure.
I asked that question because State Senator Sarah Feigenholtz gave some dire warnings just 2 or 3 weeks ago. She said if we didn't do more to not open the floodgates necessarily, but find that dial where we can start to reopen some of these larger events, then Chicago and Illinois might start losing these convention centers, not just in 2021, but perhaps forever, because once they find that new home, it's a lot harder to come back. How would you, are we on pace to retain some of those events, or is some of that already lost? What's the latest?
It's a combination of both. Some of them have been lost. We've already lost business to states like Florida, Indiana, Wisconsin, Missouri, that have been opened up quicker. And but what we're hopeful is, especially with that bridge phase announcement and eventually advancing into phase 5, hopefully this summer, that we'll be in a position to host those larger gatherings come later this year and into 2022. So we're hopeful that we'll be in a position to be able to bring those people back, and that we'll be able to start rehiring our workers. The question becomes, are we going to be in a position to just hold on that long while we wait for those large events to come back next year?
Mm-hmm. You led me to my next question, which was do you have any way to compare the industry and its performance during the coronavirus in Illinois to that of other states? It sounds like, at least anecdotally, you do.
We do. We look at key metrics like occupancy rate, average daily rate, the rate that you pay to get a room. We look at several key metrics, both throughout regions of Illinois, but also nationally. And what you've seen is that Illinois is certainly lagging, and many states that have had these restrictions in place are definitely lagging compared to states that have reopened quicker. And that's what we've been saying all along. In terms of meetings and events within our hotels, we have proven mechanisms and significant guidelines developed by the state as well as the CDC to make sure that people are kept safe when they're at these events, making sure that they're social distancing and many other provisions. But ultimately, what we're focused on right now is also making sure that hotel owners just have the resources that when demand starts to increase, which we are seeing some optimism and some encouraging signs of growth in the state. One problem they have right now is that they don't necessarily have the resources or the cash on hand to rehire their workers that are needed to come back to work to handle that increase in demand.
Yeah, another thing that is curious is in the last year or so, as every one of these annual conventions have taken their operation online, or most of them by and large, and as businesses that had meetings planned started to do those things online, you wonder how many of those habits will stick. And will that affect the long-term demand for events like these? That maybe there are some that will opt to stay remote or to have smaller events, or business travelers who once would try to go to a place, they just might get an Airbnb and hole up somewhere else. Do you see the hotel business model changing or evolving, or how will that adaptation take place in the next few years, do you think?
For the short term, there's definitely going to be some changes. There's a lot of conversation around what looks like a hybrid event, where some people are there in person, some people are tuning in remotely. But ultimately, we've been in this position and have had this conversation before. In 2008, when during the economic recession, after 9/11, when travel came to a halt, obviously we didn't have technologies like Zoom at the time, but we did have conference calls, we had phones, we had email. And the conversation was exactly the same. Will business travel come back? And I think what people realize is nothing replaces being face-to-face, especially when you're trying to make a business deal or where you're trying to learn something. Look at some of these educational conferences that take place in our hotels. Even looking at the legislature, any legislator you talk to right now says how hard it has been to formulate policy and legislate during the pandemic because we've done it remotely. So I think ultimately people realize nothing replaces the in-person meetings, and I think it will be back.
I think most people will agree. People beats pixels on a screen any day. You're asking the state, though, for some help here. I understand the tourism committee was meeting Thursday this week, and you're looking for, grant money from the state to help prop up hotels or help them make their recovery. How would hotels use this money, and why should the state step in here? Is that federal money you're looking for? How does it work?
So what it is, it's a hotel jobs recovery plan, and we're mimicking it off of a successful program that Washington, D.C. launched late last year using CARES Act money. We're proposing to use the money that's coming to Illinois from the American Rescue Plan, from the feds, the ARP plan that was recently passed by Congress. In the bill itself, it specifies that any money that the state receives, that a portion of those funds should be used to aid travel, tourism, and hospitality companies. And what we're proposing that we use this money to do is provide these hotels the resources to rehire their staff. We're saying that 80% of any money that a hotel would receive has to go to wages and benefits to the employees. Because what we're seeing right now is that leisure demand is increasing and our occupancy is starting to increase. And we do have a need for more workers to be rehired. However, there's no cash on hand to actually go out and rehire those workers because the demand's not increasing at a pace quick enough to actually pay those paychecks. So it would just be a one-time short-term infusion of support just to be able to rehire those employees. And again, a bulk of that money would go directly to wages and benefits just to get our hotel workers back to work. Over 21,000 people in our industry were laid off during the pandemic. A majority of them are still out of work. And our goal is just to get them back to work as quickly as we can.
And it sounds like you're describing that $7.5 billion bucket of money that the Congress is sending, I think in 2 different installments. But quickly, what's the ask? What's the price tag? How much do you want from the state in these grants?
So we're looking at an amount of $250 million, which would have 3% of the total amount that Illinois is bound to receive from the federal government.
Very interesting. Michael Jacobson joining us from Elgin with a look at the hotel industry, how they're faring during this pandemic. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right, we're back in just a moment.